hello there. I'm back. And today we have another episode of Beauty and the Bibliophile. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. I'm Leah. If you're not new here, thank you for returning. As often as I can, I do a series called Beauty and the Bibliophile where I do my makeup and I tell you about the latest book that I've read. Today's book is Fire and Fate. It is book 10 in the Villains series by Serena Valentino, and this came out in 2023, and we are finally finishing the Villains series. It's the last one, but spoiler alerts. If you are thinking about reading this book and you don't want to know anything about it, don't watch this video. If you're thinking about reading the book, maybe you're not sure, you want to know a little bit about it, or you don't want to read the book, but you still want to know the story, then this would be a good video for you. But warning, you will know the ending. Also, if you have not seen the movie, the Disney movie Hercules, you're going to be very lost in this story. And if you haven't seen my previous videos on the previous books in this series, or you haven't read them, you're going to be very lost as well. So I would suggest watching Hercules and watching my other videos on the books in this series. And I will link them below. I know it's a lot, but if you're into it, I'm into it. Okay, so yeah, I think we covered everything, and oh, this will be explained. Okay, so Fire and Fate, and this came out in 2023. By the way, I don't know if you can tell, I'm getting over a cold. I sound a little funny. Also my nose, it's a little swollen. Those breathe strip things, they always like bruise my nose. Anyway, so this book starts reading from the Book of Fairy Tales. It says that all the stories are woven together like a spider's web. And at the center is Hades. Hades is the Lord of the Dead and a very powerful deity. But before Hades took his throne in the underworld, he was the god of wealth, of hidden treasure, gold, and everything that lied beneath the surface of the earth, including the dead. So if you haven't gathered by now, all these stories in this series are chapters from the Book of Fairy Tales. We've also established that time is a human construct, and so time isn't necessarily in a linear fashion in these stories, that they run concurrently. The timelines of each of these stories runs concurrently. And we are about to find out why. When the old gods were defeated, namely the Titan Cronus, I think is how you say his name, time was fractured among the many worlds. And ever since, witches have not experienced time in a straight line. And sometimes they release the stories in the Book of Fairy Tales out of sequence. Because I mean, what is time to gods and witches, beings who have the powers to create or break worlds and direct the cosmos? The only thing they can't seem to control is fate. Now, the events that took place at this time are kind of hard for mortals like you and me to fathom. This was a time when behemoth titans ruled with fire and chaos, until eventually their sons and daughters, the mighty Olympians, defeated them. Okay, I'm gonna let my skincare sit in for a few minutes before we move on to makeup. The reign of the Titans had become so rife with pandemonium that the brothers Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon all decided they had to put a stop to it and overthrow the Titans and their father Cronus, and then they would become the new ruling pantheon of gods. And this war lasted 10 years. Now Hades was a major figure in this battle, and he and his brothers knew that if they were going to overthrow the Titans, they needed a great army. Because the Titans were not just mere giants. They were eaters of worlds and bigger than mountains. So the brothers were going to have to call on everything at their disposal, and so that's what they did. Poseidon called upon all the great creatures of the sea. Hades reanimated the dead, and Zeus hurled thunderbolts from the sky and called on torrential rains more powerful than any hurricane. And for 10 years, the brothers fought side by side as one until finally they defeated the Titans and locked them away forever. So on the final day of the battle, a decision was made. Hades could see his two brothers, Zeus and Poseidon, amongst the rubble, talking about something. Now, even though Hades was the oldest brother, Zeus, for some reason, always kind of took the lead. And Hades could tell that Zeus was already kind of looking to be the one that makes all the decisions now that their father was locked away with the Titans. So Hades is walking up to his brothers, and he can hear Zeus say to Poseidon, he's like, okay, so you shall rule the sea and everything in it. And Hades, he's like, you'll rule the underworld and everything in it. And Hades is like, aha, and I suppose you're gonna rule the sky and everything that comes with it, including Olympus. But you know, Hades didn't want to argue and fight with his brother. So for the sake of family and peace, he decided he would go ahead and be the ruler of the underworld. How bad could it be? But this is only the beginning of his story. Now the story we're reading goes back to the Dead Woods. Remember the realm of the queens of the dead? Primrose and Hazel, Gothel's sisters, they're still living there ever since Circe sacrificed herself to save the many kingdoms. Primrose tells her sister that she thinks she had a vision of the future. It was her and Hazel and Circe, and they were all sitting around laughing with a young man who had traveled from across the sea to bring them cake. But there was more to it than that. The Rapunzel flowers were everywhere in the many kingdoms and in the Dead Woods. And she thinks the young man's name was James. She's like, maybe we should look in the book of fairy tales and see if it's true. But Hazel was like, no. She's like, remember, we're not supposed to read stories that haven't happened yet. But Hazel's like, come on. She's like, we're witches. We're supposed to know the future. Plus, if we had read all of Circe's stories before they happened, she might still be alive. But Hazel was a stickler for the rules, and she was not having it. Then all of a sudden, there was a blinding pale blue light, and the light started to form into a vortex. And everything in the Dead Woods began to stir, and the dead began to awake from their slumber. Then, against the light of the vortex, a shape began to emerge. And Primrose and Hazel realized who this was. His hair was flames of blue, and in his arms were Circe. And it was Hades. And he smiled at them, and then he laid Circe ever so gently on some steps of a crypt. And he's like, oh, I wasn't expecting such a deliciously gruesome welcome. Looking at all the endless rows of dead. He's like, I know it's customary to bring cake to the Dead Woods, but I thought you would forgive me. He's like, what I bring is so much better, gesturing to Circe. And Hazel and Primrose are like, what happened to her? Then Circe stirs from her sleep. She looks around, and when she realizes where she is, she gets angry and she looks at Hades and she's like, what is the meaning of this? She's like, why did you bring me here? Why did you take me from the place between? She's like, and where are my mothers? And Hades is like, "Oh, really?" He's like, "Not even a thank you." He's like, "I saved your life. And if you recall, there is only one mother, singular, just Lucinda. Remember? You fused them together into one, and she is mad about it." And Cersei's like, "Well, why is a god interfering in the life of witches anyway?" She's like, "Why bring me here against my will and risk breaking the worlds?" And Hades says, "Well, because a long time ago I made a promise to your mothers that if they helped me with something, I would grant them any wish they wanted. And after all these years, they finally called in their favor. They wanted you out of the place between. So I brought you here. Simple as that." Then something began to crawl through the vortex. It was Lucinda, and her ringlets were all matted, and there was blood all over her face. She was crawling on her hands and knees and screaming in pain. And Cersei's like, "What's going on? What's wrong with her?" And she moves towards her mother. But Hades puts himself in between Cersei and Lucinda. And at the same time, Lucinda lunges for Cersei. But she couldn't get past Hades. He was too strong for her. And Lucinda's like, "Look at me." She hisses at Cersei. She's like, "You did this to me. You trapped my sisters inside of me, and now they are trying to claw their way out just to get at you, just so they can kill you." And Cersei's like, "I didn't mean for this to happen." And Hades, he grabs Lucinda by the ringlets and he's like, "That's enough." And he throws her back through the vortex and it closes up. He's like, "Dang, I thought my family was bad." Then he tells Primrose, Hazel, and Cersei that they should all probably have a talk. And the sisters and Cersei, they were all very curious as to what he had to say. So they all go into their house and they make Hades some tea. And Hades is like, "Oh, there's nothing like a cup of tea in the many kingdoms." It's like, I've thought many times about popping over and having some. And I might now more often, especially since Maleficent is no longer squatting in my castle." And he takes a sip of tea from a teacup that he is pretty sure the Odd Sisters had taken from his dining hall years ago. Now, Hades had a soft spot for witches, especially witches who didn't talk in riddles or who weren't unhinged or know-it-alls like the Fates. And Hades was already very enamored with these witches, just like he had been with the Odd Sisters so many years ago. Now, Hades could sense that Hazel and Primrose were a little concerned about what Hades was doing there. And Hades is like, "I assure you ladies, I am not going to be taking up residence in the many kingdoms. And I have no intention of showing my power in your lands." He's like, "I owed the Odd Sisters a favor and I granted that. And that's it, plain and simple." He's like, "But I did, I couldn't stand by and watch Lucinda destroy her daughter after everything she did to create her." And Cersei is like, "Well, what do you know about that?" And Hades is like, "Well, quite a bit, actually, more than I care to admit." He's like, "You see, I'm kind of the reason that the Odd Sisters are so, odd sistery." And Cersei's is like, "Well, how do you know so much about us?" And Hades is like, "Oh, well, your mother's, of course, and the Book of Fairy Tales." It's like, speaking of which, she's like, "What did your mothers tell you about me?" And Cersei's like, "Nothing." He's like, "Well, then it's about time you heard my story." He's like, "The Book of Fairy Tales is right there on the shelf." He's like, "Have your mother showed you this little trick?" And he waves his hand and the book comes flying across the room and into his lap. And he taps the book 3 times and it's read to them by its authors, the Odd Sisters, out loud to them. So we hear the book of fairy tales tell us that after the war with the Titans and Hades took his place in the underworld, that the world was much better off without the Titans. But Hades' life was not. He was deeply discontented and regretted not standing up to his brother on the day that they divided up the realms. Hades had become very bitter and lonely. He had changed a lot. He had done things he wasn't proud of out of desperation and anger. And he shouldn't have been surprised when his family started to treat him differently. They had seen the changes in him too. They distrusted him and didn't want to be in his company. And honestly, Hades kind of felt the same way about himself. He hated who he had become since taking over the underworld. And from the instant that he took the throne in the underworld, he was feared and reviled by everyone, and not to mention his family. And as the years passed, Hades felt himself becoming more vengeful and bitter, and becoming the god that his family treated him as. So one night, Hades decided to invite all of his family to dinner. And on the note of the invitation, he made sure that it said that there would be no food there served from the underworld. All the food would be from outside of the underworld. Apparently, if Olympians ate food from the underworld, it would render them permanent residents. He wanted them to know that this wasn't some kind of a trick. This was his way of extending an olive branch. He wanted to change. He wanted to be himself again. And where better place to start than with your own family? And he was very eager to make up with his brother Zeus. Now on the night of the party, nobody showed up. And Hades is sitting there, he's petting Cerberus on the head, and he's like, "Where are all my guests?" Then he pulls on a rope, and he's like, "Pain, panic, get in here." And the little devils come running into the room, and they're like, "Yes, your majesty." Hades is like, "Did you deliver my invitations like I demanded you to?" And they're like, "Oh, yes, we took them." He's like, I think everyone's super busy with Zeus's child that's gonna be born in like a fortnight. I think they're all getting ready for that." He's like, "Also, Zeus, he asked me to give you this," and he hands him an invitation to Hercules' birth celebration. So Hades realizes that his family never was gonna come to his dinner party. I guess if he wanted to see them, he was gonna have to go to Mount Olympus, which he hated going there these days. Everyone there was so beautiful and filled with light. They all looked down on him. Then, all of a sudden, three identical women, appear in his dining hall. And at first, he thought these were just dinner guests late to the party, arriving after all. But then he realized that these were not gods. These were witches. And he sensed that they were very powerful witches. Witches that could have almost been goddesses if the cosmos had aligned just right. And the three witches just stood there, bewildered. And Hades, for some reason, he immediately liked these witches. But what it was that he really liked was the power that he sensed in them. And he's like, "Well, aren't you a deliciously freakish trio?" He's like, "Welcome to the underworld." But they just stood there staring at him with their heads cocked to one side. And when they finally spoke, they were like, "We're sorry, Lord of Darkness, but we're not supposed to be here. I think we're in the wrong place." And they were dressed kind of like they had been attending a ball right before they showed up. Now, remember in the stepmother story how the fairy godmother had thrown the Odd Sisters into a vortex at the ball to get rid of them? Well, this is where they ended up. Then the one in the middle says to Hades, she's like, well, I'm Lucinda, and these are my sisters, Ruby and Martha. And Hades realized there was something familiar about these witches. And then he realized, he's like, you're from the mini kingdoms, aren't you? He's like, you're right, you're not supposed to be here. He's like, and I can smell death on you, but you're not dead. He's like, I think you're descendants of the queens of the dead. He's like, of the dead woods. He's like, you're the queens of the dead woods. Now, of course, Hades knew who the queens of the dead woods were. All keepers of the dead knew of each other. But he still couldn't figure out how they had ended up in his realm. And Lucinda's like, we are not the queens of the dead. We are the oracles of our land and the authors and writers of fates. And we would be very grateful if you could return us to the mini kingdoms. And Hades is like, well, okay. He's like, I'll get you home, but then you'll have to do something for me. And of course he wanted something. He was the king of the underworld. I mean, hadn't they ever heard of making a deal with the devil? Now he knew that in general, witches could be a little unhinged. Take his fates, for example. They always spoke in half-truths and riddles, and they were constantly flaunting their powers. But these witches were a lot more tolerable and powerful. And Lucinda's like, well, what is it that you would like, Your Majesty? And Hades is like, I don't know yet, but once I do, you'll be the first to know. Then he raised a glass of pomegranate wine and said, to new allies. Then he sent them home back through a vortex. He also told them that he very much had enjoyed their company. They were much nicer than those know-it-all fates. And Hades was a little surprised with himself. He was a little sad to see them go. But a deal was a deal. Before Lucinda stepped through the vortex, she told Hades that she was very thankful for everything the Lord of Darkness had done for them. You know, undoing what the fairy godmother had done, sending them to the underworld. And Hades was like, well, you're welcome, but let's be clear. He's like, I may like you dingbats, but I will hold you to your deal if you don't honor it. And I will bring you right back here to the underworld. He's like, okay, now off with you. Now, a fortnight later, Hades goes to Olympus, and we see everything that we saw in the movie when he goes to Hercules' birth celebration. But we do see one part that we didn't see in the movie. And that's when Hades left. When he goes to leave, Zeus follows him out of the party for a one-on-one brother-to-brother chat. But we don't get to hear the conversation just yet. Now when Hades gets back to the underworld, the know-it-all fates are there, and they tell him that his plans to overthrow Zeus would be successful as long as Hercules didn't try to fight him. So this is when Hades decides that he's going to have to turn this little baby god into a human newborn so that his minions could kill him. He couldn't do it himself, of course. He couldn't have his nephew's blood on his hands. And Hades needed this plan to work. He needed a guarantee, a magical guarantee, some help from some very powerful witches. And he knew exactly where to find them. So he instantaneously transported himself to the many kingdoms and right at the Odd Sisters' front door. And when he knocked on the door, he was very surprised to see a beautiful blonde answer the door, someone from his own lands. It was the goddess Circe. She was a daughter of a Titan and a very powerful sorceress who was known for transforming her enemies or people who offended her into animals. And when he sees her, he's like, Cersei! He's like, what are you doing here? She like grabs him and she pulls him into the house real quick, all panicked like. And with a wave of her hand, she shuts all the curtains. She's like, what are you doing here, Hades? And Hades is like, well, I'm here on my own business. He's like, but again, why are you here? So she tells him the whole story that we already know. That many years ago, Cersei heard the Odd Sisters wish for a little witch sister. And Cersei granted them that wish. And she bound herself to them through blood. And they were kin now. And Hades is like, well, you're not really known for granting wishes. And he's like looking around, kind of wondering where the Odd Sisters are. And she's like, they're my family now. And just because I'm not known for granting wishes doesn't mean I can't do it. She's like, we're gods. We can do what we want. And Hades is like, yeah, okay, whatever. And he's like, but do they know who you really are? Or do they think they conjured a little sister out of the ether? He knew there had to be more to this story. Cersei was renowned for powerful magic and vengeful ways. And then it clicked in him. He was like, she felt for them because she saw herself in them. And she tells him that they think that she is truly their sister. And since they think that, so she is. She said that she looked into their hearts and what she saw there was so painful and she wanted to help them. And she says, and so now we are sisters in spirit and in blood. And as far as they know, it's always been that way. So this is why the Oz sisters are so powerful, because they have the blood of a goddess running through their veins. And Cersei says to him, she's like, you know, I am not going to let you hurt them or let you drag them into one of your schemes. She goes over to the table and she picks up the book of fairy tales. And she brings it over to him and she says that, you know, this book was clearly written by the Odd Sisters, but that there were stories in there before their time even, and that they were written by their mothers and grandmothers. And Hades is like, okay, look, Blondie, what does any of this have to do with me? And Cersei's like, it has everything to do with you. She's like, your fate and the fate of these witches and mine are all connected somehow, and we have to figure out how. She's like, but I honestly don't have time for this right now. Me and the Odd Sisters are meant to be in the fairylands. And then all of a sudden, she like transforms herself into a little girl version of herself. She's like, I gotta get to the fairylands. Maleficent is taking her fairy exams today. And Hades is like, I know I'm gonna regret this, but who is Maleficent? And Cersei's like, just read it all in the book of fairy tales. I'll be back and then we can discuss it then. And then she leaves. Okay, I'm gonna get a little creative today with my eyeshadow. It's going to be inspired by the book cover, but then also the inside. So he decided to make himself comfortable, make a cup of tea, and he started reading from the book of fairy tales. And the mini kingdoms ended up being a lot more interesting than he was expecting. While he read, it became clear that the Odd Sisters had a fondness for and felt protective toward women who had been wronged in some way. And even if their methods were a little misguided, their heart was in the right place for the most part. The Odd Sisters were truly trying to help these women. And as he read more of the stories from the book of fairy tales, he started to fall in love with this land. He saw a lot of similarities between his realm and the many kingdoms. And he sat there for hours reading the stories stories from the past and some from the future, and some were very heartbreaking. He loved reading the stories of the inhabitants of the many kingdoms, which reminded him of the sagas of his own world. He started to really fall in love with this land. And most importantly, he no longer felt lonely. He actually started to feel an inkling of who he was before he came to rule the underworld. And the more he read about the Odd Sisters, the more he grew to like them, and the closer he felt to them. He felt that they had a connection, that they shared similar histories, and it was clear that they shared a fate. And he started to daydream about what it would be like to live in the many kingdoms and have a place of his own there. He thought it would be nice to have a place to stay while he figured out how he was going to overthrow his brother. So right there on the spot, he dreamed up a foreboding castle, which he named the Forbidden Mountains. He also made sure that there was a porthole between the many kingdoms and his own realm, so he could easily go back and forth. Then, all of a sudden, the Fates appear in the Odd Sisters' kitchen. And they told him, they're like, we know what you're thinking. We know you want to stay here in the many kingdoms, but you can't. You have to fight your brother. That's your fate. And it is important that you fulfill your fate because a lot of people's fate is tangled up with yours. And there's nothing that we can do about that. And we fear if you don't fulfill your fate, then the fate of your realm and the many kingdoms and all of ours fate is in danger. But we can help you with that. There is a way for you to fulfill your fate and stay in the many kingdoms at the same time. And he's like, you want to help me? They're like, yes, but it is dangerous. You will need the help of very powerful witches. But it does seem that you have access to some. If you can find the spell that you need in their mother's spell books, you will be able to reside here and in your own realm, because you will need to split your fate string. And Hades is like, well, isn't cutting fate strings like your thing? Why can't you just do it? They're like, no. We cut strings of fate, not split them. There's a big difference. And Hades is like, so there would be two of me? Like a copy? And the Fates are like, no, not a copy. One and the same. You will be him and he will be you. Then you will be able to defeat your brother, take over Olympus, and stay here if you wish. Then the Fates disappear. I don't know. You see where I'm going with this? And he decides that, yes, this is what he is going to do. This was the debt that he was going to call in from the Odd Sisters. And nothing was going to stand in his way. Except for Circe, maybe. She had warned him not to pull her sisters into any of his schemes. He was definitely going to have to do something about her. Now, while he was still waiting for the Odd Sisters to get back, Flanzy came in. Remember Flanzy? The Odd Sisters' cat? She comes into the house, and Hades, he's got this strong feeling that this isn't just a cat. He wondered if maybe this was someone who Circe had turned into a cat, someone that had offended her. Now this little cat tells Hades that she wants to tell him a secret, but he has to promise not to tell. Now Hades was hoping that the cat was going to tell him who he truly was, or who the cat truly was, since Hades felt so strongly this wasn't just a cat. So Flanzy whispers in Hades' ear, but of course we don't get to hear the secret just yet. Now whatever the secret was made Hades very happy, and he decided it would be worth keeping this secret. He also decided he was sick of waiting on the Odd Sisters, and he was just gonna go to the fairylands and find them. He knew that they were at Maleficent's fairy exam, so he followed the vibrations of the Odd Sisters. But on his way, he got distracted. He finally saw in person his castle on the Forbidden Mountain, and he was drawn inside and drawn down into the catacombs. Now the passageway opened up into a grand hall with tall pillars, and there were statues everywhere. And in the center was a massive, formidable statue of the cruel and evil witch, Manya. Remember Manya? This is the Odd Sisters and Gothel's mother. Now right then, Hades realized where he was. He was beneath the dead woods and inside the dead queen's death chamber, and he should not have been down there. Then Manya's statue begins to cry blood, and it starts speaking and shaking the place, and she is like, "The dead ones are always welcome here, Lord of the Underworld. Your coming was foretold, but choose your next steps wisely. You hold the fate of many in your hands." And Hades is like, can your daughters not take their place here as queens just like you did? And Manya's like, "All of my daughters have betrayed me or are fated to, and I will not help them ascend the throne or welcome them beyond the veil." And Hades is like, "Well, maybe if you just told them who they really are, you wouldn't have all this prophecy nonsense on your hands." Now I think what he's referring to here is the fact that, you know, the Odd Sisters did used to be one, just Lucinda, and that Manya's mother, Nestes, had made them into three. Their grandmother, if you remember all that. I think at this point in the story, the Odd Sisters still think they're part of the White family because Nanny had given them to the Whites to be raised. I think that's what he's talking about. Anyways, so Manya says that her daughters do not belong there, and neither does he. She's like, "We are connected through death, Lord of the Underworld, but we are not friends." And suddenly, Hades felt very sad for the Odd Sisters, knowing that this was their mother. You know, their family had abandoned them just the way Hades' family had abandoned him. Their mother had cast them from their rightful place, just as Zeus had banished him to the underworld. And he started to feel a deepening kinship with these strange women. And he decided that he was going to do whatever he could to help them. So Hades, he goes to leave, and he tells the Queen of the Dead that, you know, he would never return to the dead woods uninvited again. And he makes his way back through the catacombs up to his castle. And he starts to think about the last time he saw his brother Zeus and the last conversation that they had had. The one when he left Hercules' birth celebration, the one we didn't get to hear yet. Zeus had followed Hades out of the party to talk alone. And he's like, "What is this all about, Hades? Why did you invite all of us to dinner?" And Hades is like, "Oh, well, I don't know. Perhaps it was an olive branch. Or perhaps I just momentarily lost my senses." And Zeus is like, "Come on, Hades." He's like, "Everyone knows that food consumed in the underworld renders the person an occupant forever. Do you really expect us to think you weren't trying to trick us?" And Hades, he's irritated, and he sarcastically says, he's like, "No, you're right, Zeus. I was trying to trick you." As if you didn't make the laws and can change them at will whenever you want. He's like, we both know you just didn't want to come. I don't think I want to do lashes today. I'm not feeling 100% just yet, and I just don't feel like it. Do you mind? And Zeus is like, no, I didn't. And why would I? Look at you. You're hideous. You've become a monster. He's like, you're evil and bitter and cruel. And Hades is like, and it's by your design. He's like, you be careful, brother. The next time you hear from me, it's not going to be an invitation to dinner. It's going to be a declaration of war. So Hades, he kind of, he comes back to himself. And he knows that, neither of his brothers loved him or valued him anymore. They saw him as a monster, which was just fine with Hades. He didn't care for them that much as well, either, anyway. Well, maybe Poseidon a little bit, but that was a different story. A story that he had actually read in Ursula's story in the Book of Fairy Tales, but they called him Triton there for some reason. And Hades felt more determined than ever in his decision to take over Olympus and cast Zeus into the underworld. He knew he was on the right path. Now he had intended to go to the fairylands, but he ended up deciding to just stay at his castle and contemplate what he was going to do next. And he sent a message on a crow to the Odd Sisters for them to come and visit him at his castle when they were done at the fairy exams. And as he was waiting, he was trying to figure out what to do about Circe. He decided that the best thing would be to take Circe and put her away somewhere and bound her there so that she could never return to the many kingdoms. But how to do this without the Odd Sisters knowing? So he decided to check in on the Odd Sisters, see what they were doing by creating a vortex. And he saw that the fairylands were in chaos. There were fairies running and screaming in every direction, and fire was raining from the sky from a dragon. And the Odd Sisters were running towards the fire, screaming Circe's name over and over. They were afraid that she had gotten caught up in the flames. But remember, Hades knows that Circe is a goddess and could never succumb to such a death. But the Odd Sisters think she's a real little sister of theirs. They don't know she's a goddess. So Hades, he sees his opportunity to get rid of Circe, and the Odd Sisters would think that she just died in the fire. And Hades, he didn't even really feel bad about this because, the Odd Sisters, they would do the same thing if they were in his place, right? So he reaches into the vortex and pulls Circe through. And Circe's just like, what are you doing? And she goes to go back through the vortex, but she can't. And she looks at Hades and she's like, you bound my magic? And she's like, there is no way I'm going to let you drag my sisters into your war with Zeus. And he's like, I know. That's why you have to leave. Goodbye. He snaps his fingers and she just disappears into thin air. Now, with her out of the way, Hades is one step closer to defeating his brother Zeus. Now, weeks later, the Odd Sisters are still in mourning, and Hades is trying to help lift their spirits because he needs them to be strong enough to help him. They were basically catatonic, just staring. And so to snap them out of it, Hades says, what if there was a way you could make a new Circe and I could help you? And this got their attention immediately. Hades explained to them that while he was reading the Book of Fairy Tales, he saw that the witches of the Dead Woods had very powerful spells, including spells of necromancy. He had learned through the Book of Fairy Tales that there were young, inexperienced witches there now, trying to take their place as the new queens of the dead. but were having some trouble learning their magic. And I'm sure they would appreciate some experienced witches coming along and helping them. Remember, this is Gothel, Primrose, and Hazel that he's referring to. He tells them that he thinks it would be best to send the Odd Sisters there under the guise of wanting to help them come into their powers. And while they were there, they could go through their mother's spell books and find the spell that would create a new Circe and the spell that would split Hades' fate string. Of course, it would be easier if he could just go to the Dead Woods and get the spell books himself, but he had promised Manya that he would not enter the Dead Woods uninvited again, and when it was ever possible, he did try to be a demon of his word. And the sisters are like, "A new Circe, you say?" And Hades is like, "Yes, and all I ask in return is that you help me with the spell to help me split my fate string." And the Odd Sisters are like, "Well, we don't have the power to do that. We don't even know the spell." He's like, "But you do have the power. The fates told me so. All you need now is the spell. And you have ties to the witches of the Dead Woods. So you'll have no problem getting into the Dead Woods. And you're entitled to that magic just as much as the witches who reside there now are." He's like, go and visit Gothel and her sisters. And while you're there, look in the spell books and find the spell that will split my fate string and create you a new Circe. And the Odd Sisters seemed intrigued, and they were like, "Okay." And they're like, "And if we do all this, we'll be even?" And Hades is like, "Maybe." So the Odd Sisters agree, and they go to the Dead Woods. And everything that happens there is what we already read in the Gothel book. Now, weeks later, the Odd Sisters come to Hades at the Forbidden Mountain, and they tell him that they found the spell to split his fate string, but not the one for creating a new Circe. And they told him, like, "We found a very interesting spell, one that can make a witch into 3, and we think with some modifications, we can alter it to make 2 of you to split your fate string. We think we can have it ready by the next full moon." So a few days later, on the night of the full moon, Hades met the Odd Sisters at their house. And then there was a knock at the door, and it was the Fates. And Hades was pretty upset that they were there. He's like, "You invited those know-it-alls?" And Lucinda takes Hades and kind of takes him into the kitchen. She's like, "Why are you so upset that they're here?" And he's like, "'Cause they're always ruining my plans and telling me I'm gonna fail. Plus, something about them, I don't trust them." And Lucinda's like, "But aren't these the witches that have the power to cut fate strings?" And Hades is like, "Yeah." She's like, "That's precisely why I want them here, to make sure they don't get too twitchy with those scissors." And Hades laughs. He's like, "Why, you tricky little witch." He's like, "I love you." And they both freeze. And he's like, Yeah, I just said I love you. Let's not make a big deal of it." Now, I think when he said I love you, I think it was like a familial love, not like a romantic love. Anyway, so then the Fates, they're like, "The witching hour is almost upon us. It's time for the splitting ceremony." So Hades and the 6 witches, they go out into the sprawling oak trees, and the witches start to repeat an incantation. And Hades stands in the middle of a shard of moonlight, and the witches surround him, dressed in black hooded cloaks. Now Hades could feel the cosmos aligning within him, and Lucinda had future fate come over and hold his fate string taut, while she took a dagger and split the fate string towards him until it reached him. And all the witches were chanting, "Make what was 1 into 2, bring his double into view. Grace our realm with more than one, untangle his web he has spun. Bring to Bring 2 Hades to us this night. His brother Zeus he must smite. And then Hades felt himself fading, dying. And the last thing he saw before he closed his eyes was Lucinda's smile. Now remember, all of this that we're hearing is from the book of fairy tales that Hades, Circe, Primrose, and Hazel are all sitting around listening to. And Circe says, "So I assume my mother's betrayed you. How did you survive?" And Hades is like, "They didn't betray me. They made 2 of me just as I asked." And Hades is like, "Well, if the spell worked, then why is Zeus still running Olympus?" And Hades gave her the short answer, and he was like, "Well, you know, fate, I guess." He's like, "I know Primrose has seen it in her visions." He's like, "It was fate, just like it was fate for you to be the Circe that rules the dead woods." And Circe says, "So all this happened so that I would become the queen of the dead?" And Hades is like, "You know, your mothers had good intentions. They felt everyone deserved someone to protect them, not just princesses. And do you know why they felt that way? Because they knew all too well what it was like to be alone in the world. Until Circe came along, but I took that from them, leaving them alone to figure out how to make their own Circe. It's not entirely their fault that they became corrupted. That's why I felt I owed your mothers that one last favor of taking you out of the place between." And then Hades is like, "You know, isn't it interesting how family has the power to hurt you like nobody else?" And Hazel's like, "Yeah," she's like, "I think I read something like that in Ursula's story. Or maybe it was Grimhilda's." And Hades is like, "That's my point. We've all been hurt by our families. But look at us now, making families of our own with people that we choose to love." And Hades was starting to like kind of feel inspired by Circe, Primrose, and Hazel. They too had been forced into a position that they hadn't really wanted. But they were nothing like the queens that had come before them. They were trying to be different and create the dead woods into something wonderful and beautiful. They weren't falling into bitterness and despair like Primrose. Primrose was always shining her light in the dark places, being optimistic about the future. And Hazel helped both of the other 2 explore the past and to see it clearly, while Circe rooted herself in the present, fighting for what was important. They were the fates of this land, a new Odd Sisters. So then they continue with the book of fairy tales. So there are 2 Hades now. After the string splitting ceremony, the party disbanded. The fates went back to their realm. The Odd Sisters went back to the dead woods to try to find the spell for creating a new Circe, and the 2 Hades went back to the Forbidden Mountain to try and figure out their plans for overthrowing Zeus. They decided that the second Hades would take the original Hades' place in the underworld and keep the original Hades apprised of everything going on, while the original Hades stayed at the Forbidden Mountain to lay the groundwork for their attack on Zeus. Now remember, time works differently in the many kingdoms. While the original Hades only experienced a few weeks go by, 18 years had passed in his realm. And the second Hades was busy trying to defeat Hercules because pain and panic had not killed him the way they were supposed to. Also during this time, the Odd Sisters ended up finding a spell to create a new Circe and did it because they grew impatient with waiting on Hades to finish up what he was doing with his fight against Zeus to help them. Now the next time that Hades saw Lucinda, she had changed. Lucinda was very angry with him because he had promised to help them with their spell to create a new Circe, but he hadn't because he was so busy with what was going on with Hercules. Now Hades realized what had happened. They had sacrificed themselves to make Circe. That's why they had changed. They had used the best parts of themselves to make her. And that all-prevailing evil, that legacy that the dead queens of the dead woods had left behind, that they were descendants of, were invading all of those empty spaces. Then the Odd Sisters tell Hades that they were going to do the same thing for Maleficent. They were going to help Maleficent make a daughter for herself. And Hades is like, you can't do that. Look what it's done to you. And Lucinda was offended by that. She's like, what do you mean? And Hades is like, you must stop this. You have to take the best parts of yourself back. And Lucinda's like, we can't do that. She's like, that would kill her. You would have us kill our own daughter? And he's like, you have to. He's like, I'll help you find a better way. And they're like, you're the one that told us to do this, and now you're telling us to undo this? Lucinda's like, you know, I think you're just jealous. Lucinda's like, you abandoned us, and you abandoned the Forbidden Mountain, which is why Maleficent is living there now. She's like, I don't think you ever cared for us at all. And Hades is like, that's not true. Lucinda's like, go back to the underworld and rot. And she's like, besides, do you honestly think you could have defeated your brother? She's like, see for yourself in the book of fairy tales. And all of a sudden the book comes flying across the room, lands next to Hades, and opens up to his story. And he's like, I didn't see this story in there before. And Lucinda's like, that's because it was still being written. Hades was confused. He's like, you better start explaining that. And so Lucinda tells him, she's like, you know, we can't read the stories about ourselves until they've completely unfolded. Most of the time. Sometimes we can, other times we can't, which seems to be the case with you. Apparently, there's even more to your story, something even we can't see. It seems our fates are forever entangled, but we won't know how until time reveals it. So then Hades looks in the book and he sees everything that's being written that we saw in the Hercules movie. He sees the other Hades fail. He sees himself fail. It seems it was just his fate to rule the underworld again. But that was not the end of the story. As the Odd Sisters had said, his story was still being written. Then we go back to Hades, Circe, Hazel, and Primrose reading out of the book of fairy tales. They suddenly stop reading because the whole mansion that they're in is like shaking and the walls are starting to crumble. And they go running to the windows to see what's going on, and they see dark clouds circling over the dead woods. Hades knew this could only be the Odd Sisters, and Circe's like, oh, this is all my fault. It's because I wanted to fuse my mother into one. I was being selfish. They were happy as three in the place between, but I wanted my mother here with me in the land of the living. I thought combining them would make that possible. And Hades is like, it's not your fault. He's like, you were not meant to be in the place between, just like I am not meant to stay in the many kingdoms. Then all of a sudden you hear the Odd Sisters shrieking voices scream, she is nothing to us. And the walls start to rumble and shake and crack even more violently. Then they saw them crawling out of a portrait that was hanging over the fireplace. They're crawling out, and Lucinda looks like she had been ripped apart and then haphazardly stitched back together, and there was blood oozing from her wounds. And Martha and Ruby were also looked like they had blood all over them. And when Hades saw them, he was horrified, and he rules the dead. It broke his heart to see them this way. And he's like, oh, Lucinda, what happened to you? He's like, why didn't you use your magic to heal yourself? And she was like, because I wanted Cersei to see what she'd done to me. She's like, you know Cersei must die. It's the only way to have us back. And Hades looks at the odd sisters, and he knew that he owed them this. He knew what he had to do. He knew Cersei would understand. Now suddenly, we are back in the underworld with Hades. And Hades, he's watching the new arrivals land on the shores of the underworld for the first time. And this night, he was anticipating the new arrivals with more excitement than normal. Then he saw them, the odd sisters, looking exactly how they did the first time he laid eyes on them, even with their shiny pointed boots. He's like, welcome back, witches. And they come running to him and they give him big hugs. And he's like, well, I take it you've forgiven me for killing you. And they're like, of course we forgive you. You saved Cersei and you saved us. And he's like, well, thank the deities. And before you ask, yes, Cersei, Primrose, and Hazel, they're all just fine. They're still back in the Deadwoods, restoring it to the way they want it. He's like, and I have a surprise for you. He's like, behold. And the odd sisters, they go, Cersei! And they go running to her to hug her, but then they stop because they realize who this actually is. This isn't Cersei, their daughter, the one they created. This is the original Cersei, their sister, the one that had been taken away from them so many years ago. Then Flanzy shows up. And Lucinda and her sisters are like, what are you doing here, little kitty? And Hades is like, oh, she's been with me for a while now. He's like, I thought it was only fitting that the great Chocolaty, I think is how you pronounce it, rejoin us where she belongs in the underworld. And Flanzy is like, that was our secret. And Hades is like, oh, come on, we're all family here. It's not like they wouldn't have figured it out anyway. And Hades, he's like, let's make a toast. And he hands out glasses of pomegranate wine. And he says, to family. He's like, may we all live deliciously. Hades was happier than ever. He finally had love and family in the underworld. Now back to Hazel, Primrose, and Cersei in the Dead Woods. They were exhausted, but the Dead Woods were quiet once more, thanks to Hades, and they wondered if they'd ever see him again. The Dead Woods were quiet now, finally, after Hades took Lucinda, Ruby, and Martha back to the underworld with him. It seemed to Cersei, Primrose, and Hazel that they were finally free to make the Dead Woods what they wanted it to be. From that point on, they would now be writing the book of fairy tales. And they wanted to make up for everything that the previous Queens of the Dead and the Odd Sisters had done during their reigns of terror. And Primrose looks at the other two and she's like, you know what I still don't get is, what does all of this mean for James's story? And Hazel's like, well, how do you know what happens in James's story? I thought we agreed you weren't gonna read it, and when did you have time anyway? And Primrose is like, well, I didn't read it. I just know it. I kind of just know about all the stories that haven't happened yet. And Hazel's like, well, how? She's like, it's something I heard Hades thinking. Remember, they can read minds. She's like, it was something about how I'm the one who looks to the future. Hazel is the one that learns from the past. And Cersei is the one that keeps herself rooted in the present. And Hazel's like, well, that still doesn't explain how you know the stories that haven't happened yet. And Primrose is like, well, don't you see? She's like, if we split time between the three of us, it'll never be a burden to any one of us. Once I decided that I wanted the role of future, all the stories just came flooding into me. And Cersei is like, well, what does that have to do with James? Primrose is like, in James's story, Lucinda was in the place between, and Ruby and Martha were still inside of her. But that story hasn't happened yet. And Hazel's like, so what does that mean? And Cersei's like, I think it means Hades changed fate. Perhaps we do have the power to change our fates. And they all wondered if it would be possible to change the fates of others. And then right then, a raven comes flying into the room with a message from Snow White. And Cersei takes the message and she reads it. And she says, Snow White needs our help. There's something wrong with Grimhilda's mirror. And in that moment, Cersei, Primrose, and Hazel knew that they were truly the new trio of witches of this land. But they were going to be a different kind of odd sisters. They were going to be the Ladies of Light. The end. So Hades is the reason this whole series even started. He was the reason the odd sisters were so vengeful and crazy, because he took their sister away. So a couple things I had to look up, and that was this Hecate character, the one that Flanzy actually was. So I looked her up, and she is the goddess of magic, witchcraft, the light, the night, ghosts, necromancy, and the moon, which I thought was very interesting. Kind of cute. And then I also looked up this whole Cersei being a goddess thing. And Cersei is an enchantress and a minor goddess in ancient Greek mythology. And in most accounts, Cersei is described as the daughter of a sun god and a nymph. Cersei was renowned for her vast knowledge of potions and herbs. And through the use of these and a magic wand, she would transform her enemies, or those who offended her, into animals. Which makes total sense that she was the one that cursed the beast. Which makes me think that Disney used this Greek goddess as inspiration for the enchantress at the beginning of the Beauty and the Beast movie, and why Serena Valentino chose to name her Cersei. I love when things come together. Now I think the lesson of this book is that family is what you make it, which I completely agree. It used to be a long time ago, you know, your blood was very important when life was a lot more dangerous. They were really the only people you could trust. Life isn't like that anymore. So we're not bound by those rules. I don't believe. So anyways, that is the end of the villain series. We did it. We finished it. But you know what? Guess not really. I saw that there is another book in the series coming out. But I'm assuming from here on out it's going to be very different. That the Ladies of Light are going to be the new odd sisters going around trying to fix things in the many kingdoms. And the next book is on Gaston. So I guess we're going to get his point of view of the situation. Now the only question that I don't think I got answered still is, why did Manya give away the odd sisters, her daughters? Why didn't she want to raise them? So she gave them away to the whites, but then had another daughter, Gothel. Anyway, that's the only question I still have in my head. If you are interested in reading this book and reading this series, I will put the Amazon link in the description. It's not an affiliate link, I just put it there for your convenience. And if there are any books that you would like me to cover on Beauty and the Bibliophile, now that we have finished this series, I'm feeling freed up to do more adventurous type books. So let me know what you want to see. If you have any suggestions, put them in the comments. Also, make sure and give this video a like so that I know what kind of videos I should be working on. Make sure and subscribe so you don't miss any more uploads. And remember, Family is what you make it. And I will see you in the next one. Bye. Then, against the light of the vortex, a shape became. Bleh. And he's like, oh, I wasn't expecting such a... Sensing. Then Cersei stirs. Now, with her out of the way, Zeus... No. So anyway, that is the end of the video. I will link it. I will